Good evening. On the Young Cape this evening, we have Des Palm, who is a leader among the CapeXit group, which is an organization aiming for the independence of the Western Cape from South Africa. They differ in certain respects from the Cape Independence Advocacy Group and from the Cape Party in ways that Des will be explaining to us very shortly. Is there anything you'd like to add to that introduction?
Robert, thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the opportunity. Now, I think you've encapsulated it quite well. We can elaborate on that soon.
Excellent. Well, I think most people are aware that the Cape Independence landscape has become quite broad. We have the Cape Party, which has been laboring for quite some time. We've interviewed Jack Miller on this channel. There is the Cape Independence Advocacy Group, which is a simple pressure group aiming for a referendum that will deliver independence. We have interviewed, of course, Phil Craig on this channel as well. And then we have also the Vryheidsfront Plus and the Cape Coloured Congress, who have also put the consideration of Western Cape independence into their considerations. So into this landscape, where does your group fit and what are your strategies?
Robert, I think the first thing to note that is different to all the other groups. Obviously, CapeXit is non-political. We're a non-profit organization, but we're non-political. So we're moving in the non-political landscape. And the second important thing is that...
And by non-political, you mean non-ideological?
Non-ideological, yes, correct. No aspirations to become a political party. We're not supporting any political party. We stay out of politics. We believe that the solution that lies in independence must happen in a non-political environment. When you look at the political landscape, it goes all about votes. And for me to be successful, first of all, I must at least try and win at the polls, or I must make a substantial increase in my voter base, my support base, to become relevant in the government of the day. And I have to do that by actually convincing you, Robert, that you've got to give me your vote. And then you get approached by the next party and they got to convince you that I've not been selling you some good stuff and they must promise you, make you better promises to get your vote back. So it becomes an entire battle around the voter base, where CapeXit is looking this outside the political spectrum, and we gain support for independence merely by asking the question, do you think independence is the solution? Would you vote in a referendum, and will you vote yes? So we don't care. The person that supports independence, you can vote for the political party of his or her choice. We're quite happy with that. It's of no interest to us. However, of all the organizations you mentioned, we are the only one that are physically receiving signed mandates for independence. And that is the mandates that we are gathering to grow to the support figure of 1.6 million people. And that figure is based on the number of registered voters with the IEC, the Independent Electoral Commission, in the Western Cape, because that's the only criteria that's internationally recognized to be used as the yardstick to measure, first of all, the will of the people, and to ascertain the number which is then deemed as a majority support.
I think this is that's quite an interesting strategy, because quite often attempts to gain independence rely on rather fickle once-off methods like a referendum, which are subject to a lot of political pressure from the media. They're subject to the weaknesses of electoral systems. They're subject to all kinds of various political pressures. And of course, the usual problem of people who don't pitch up to vote.
Correct.
So who came up with this strategy for sort of building, for lack of a better word, a pledge system as opposed to a voting system?
Robert, what we did is we actually started way back, I think in 2010 or 11, with an organization called the Western Cape Action Forum, which was a very loosely formed activist group. And we did the normal protest drives and et cetera, picketing and protesting. Already back then, we had the independence of the Western Cape as part of our idea. Then in January 2018, we decided that we quite often hear that people say enough is enough. And in January 2018, the directors of CapeXit decided enough is now really enough. We are now going to structure all our efforts and our attempts and our goal. And that is when we registered CapeXit as a non-profit company, which later became a non-profit organization. And in this process, we went through the over 231 successful secessions that's already happened in the world. We looked at why did they want to secede, what's the road they followed, ultimately what was the end chapter of that secession movement, be it civil unrest. Lately, a lot of them has achieved what we call a velvet divorce, which is rather a secession around negotiation. And we then realized that we have to approach this outside the political sphere. We cannot hope to have an influence if we want to try this, play this on the political playing field. And then you go back to what are the criteria for successful secession. And number one on that list is you have to have the will of the people on your side. How do you test and obtain the will of the people? Is to ask them to give you a mandate, so that the mandate says we will vote and we support independence. So that is how we came about the structure of not trying to win politically, because quite frankly, we are very much convinced that to try and win politically is in the South African context is not going to happen. It will take you many, many years. And if we look at the rate of decline in the economy and on other fronts, we don't have many years left anymore.
No, that does seem like a sound assessment. One of the other things that you deal with in South Africa is the very aggressive instruments of subversion and infiltration. I mean, we saw what happened to the what's it called, the African Transformation Movement, the ATM Party. That was quite dramatic.
Yeah. The sad thing, Robert, is a lot of these things are nowadays playing out publicly in the open. It's being accepted as a common part of life. We've heard yesterday that it was clearly said by the president that they will now initiate an assistance fund in the tourism industry for any black tourism businesses that wants to be established and start growing. So we sit back, we look at this and we say, hang on, what about the established businesses that are there, that are closing their doors, that's been in the market for many, many years, and it's actually giving work to a lot of people. So the actual racism against minorities has now become an everyday thing, and the minorities are expected not to sit up and object against anything that comes their way in that form and manner. So yeah, very open. And I think being done unapologetically.
Yes. What has struck me is that there's so little resistance to it. I mean, you would expect that such blatant discrimination, never mind against white people who have been conditioned to accept these retributive methods, but amongst colored people and Indian people who do not benefit from these and didn't benefit a whole lot from the previous system either, that the frustration amongst them might lead to violence, and yet you don't seem to see all of that much. Most of the violence still seems to be directed inward amongst the community.
Yes, indeed. Look, especially in the Western Cape, we're not people of a violent nature. We have always been in favor of good governance, of sound governance, and as far as you possibly can, a corrupt-free governance. The problem in the Western Cape at the moment is that everything that's being decided about the Western Cape is being decided by the national government up in Pretoria. There is no understanding of the demographics of the minorities in the Western Cape, neither as to what their needs are. The Western Cape has never been governed by the local or the national government or the ANC. It's always been out of their hands, which in itself shows you that the people of the Western Cape, and indeed this was supported by a poll that Phil Craig and them did from the advocacy group, that the majority of the people in the Western Cape are pro-independence. In fact, most of the supporters of the local government are pro-independence. So the decisions that are being handed down is not in favor of the people of the Cape. And I think politically, they've become so tired and so punch drunk that they no longer believe that they, in any way or form, that there can be a political solution.
Yes, this I think the general malaise and that sense of defeatism that we encounter amongst a lot of people is very, very common. A lot of people immediately, when they think of Western Cape independence, their first thought is, well, the Chinese style, Tibet occupation strategy that the ANC has adopted towards the Western Cape. It can't be stopped. It's an inevitable tide of change that cannot be abated, and that will consume the Western Cape before it can get on its own 2 feet. How do you go about combating this particular pessimistic vision?
Robert, we must be honest about one thing. If we talk minorities, we're talking white, colored, Khoi, San, and Muslim. When you look at the minorities, especially on the colored and the Khoi and the San people and the Muslim people, granted before 1994, they were sidelined. They were relegated more to being a non-white type of black category. And then after 1994, they again being sidelined. This time they're too white, which puts them in a very precarious predicament because they feel that they are not being listened to. Now, this is what is good about sovereign independence, because what we aim for is a direct democracy. And in a direct democracy in the Western Cape, we go back to the system which we had, which are basically municipalities. In other words, each suburb, if you know the Western Cape, if you get suburbs like Bellville or Woodstock or Claremont or Mitchells Plain, each suburb will actually become accountable for their own form of governance. That is the most decentralized direct democracy you can get. So the people that, and we get a lot of skepticism, they say, but we are going to be sidelined again. And then we explain the system of a direct democracy, where we say if you live in Mitchells Plain, for instance, the residents of Mitchells Plain will be charged with governing Mitchells Plain. So now you are responsible and you are very much an active part of any decisions that's being taken in your area where you live, which is to your either improvement or for a better situation. And crime is very much a big problem. Drug abuse is very much a big problem. So going to a direct democracy where you'll have each municipal area addressing their own problems, you'll find that the problems differ from suburbs that are removed from one another as close as 10 kilometers or 15 kilometers.
They can tailor-make the responses to their own context and their values.
Yeah, absolutely. So that is what we convey, and that is what we carry out, the message that the system of governance will be different. You will now, your voice will be heard, and you can play an active part in your area.
Yeah, I mean, look, the Swiss model that people tout, and the wave of localism that I mean, I think our paper falls, our magazine falls under. I think I think, while everyone can appreciate the value of these things, most people wonder if it's achievable, given how tight the time frame is, and given how quickly the demographics of the Western Cape are changing in favor of ANC-dependent voters who are being brought in from other provinces. And this question does get raised a lot. I suppose the question then is, how do you see what time frame do you see, and how do you see the Cape independence movement in general, not just your own organization, reaching this target?
Robert, firstly, there's one very interesting fact. The busing in of people into the Western Cape to achieve what we call political displacements, yes, correctly so. It's very much a topic. However, it is found that a lot of people that are being bused into the Western Cape actually are not voting either at all or for the ANC or the EFF. Now, that clearly came out in the poll that advocacy group did, where they found that 28% of ANC supporters and voters are in favor of independence. Now, we must not lose sight of the reality, and we've been in contact with black community leaders from some of the black settlements, and the people look us in the face, and first of all, they say, how are we going to position after independence, us as blacks? We then explain the concept of a direct democracy, where they will be in charge of their own area, their own settlement, own municipal area. And then they actually come out to say to you, we are in favor of independence. Because at the end of the day, that guy and I am looking for the same thing, which is a roof over my head, food on my table, and a job to do. So that on the one side. On the other side, if we had to have this conversation 2 years ago, 3 years ago, the issue of independence would not have been so on the forefront as it is now. The idea of independence, the concept of independence, and the understanding around the fact that we are entitled to independence has done tremendously. CapeXit, for instance, beginning of last year, we had 7,000 registered mandates. We now have 680,000 registered mandates. So vast growth, and the combined efforts of CapeXit, advocacy group, the Cape Party, any person, any organization that actually manifests the need for independence, they are putting the word out there. And nowadays, if you start talking to somebody about independence in the Western Cape, it's not such a foreign subject anymore.
Yes, no, I've noticed it's gotten quite large. Phil Craig has really been working his fingers to the bone on that issue, hasn't he?
Absolutely.
But speaking of which, you many of these different groups, and I've spoken to a few people, not just the big leaders, but a few other people involved with these movements, and I noticed that there's a tendency of people to try and distinguish various groups to distinguish themselves from one another quite strongly. And I was wondering how much cohesion does the movement have as a whole? How well do you get on with each other as different organizations?
Robert, we definitely in discussions with one another. We formed a organization called Cape Independence Forum under Dr. Peter Hammond. Dr. Peter Hammond was involved in the independence of South Sudan. He's very knowledgeable on independence as such. And under his chairmanship, the groups are actually getting together around the table and discussing it. The good thing is that we all have the end goal as independence. Although our paths at the moment may differ, the one like advocacy group of very much a very successful pressure group in terms of taking on the local government and asking them, why can't we have a referendum? On CapeXit side, we actually creating the reality of independence on the ground by getting in mandates. The Cape Party has got the political approach from their side. And it's all because all's got the common goal of independence. These groups will ultimately, our paths will converge.
Sort of like
there was some independence.
Sort of like a UDF for Cape Independence.
Yeah, absolutely. If you look at there were, I don't know if it were Scotland or some other, one of the independence movements who actually gained or achieved secession. They had 9 groups working towards independence, and they were all coming from all different angles. What the good thing is you're creating the idea or the reality of independence in the minds of the people. And what you want that person to do is to say, yes, I support this. And the day he goes to the referendum to vote yes for secession or independence, all these different organizations would have achieved what they set out to do. And that's the goal of achieving independence. And we, quite frankly, we don't care who gets to that line first and get the referendum to be held. That is the ultimate goal for all of us. So I think we will reach a tipping point where the support grows phenomenally, and all these organizations will move closer and closer to one another until we get over the goal line.
I suppose one of the biggest obstacles you face is that, according to the Cape Party's research, the biggest obstacle is actually the wealthy white slice of Cape Town, which is the Constantia, Clifton sort of crowd, who are rabidly anti-independence and very, very loyal to the current regime. How do you plan to counter their position in the media? Because that class and that ethnic group, for lack of a better term, that sort of upper class white Anglo crowd has a stranglehold on media in South Africa.
Robert, the interesting thing is, I think it was the Cape Party which they did a survey.
Yeah.
It may have been at 2016 election, somewhere around there. And the survey returned only 11% support for independence from Constantia.
Yeah.
In the meantime, two fairly serious things happened. And that the first one is that all pension funds are being targeted. And the second thing is expropriation without compensation is being written into the Constitution. Now, those two factors knows no level of wealth, no race, nothing at all. It will target me sitting in table view, or it will target the guy in Constantia equally, because we may both lose our house and our boat and our caravan and the land and your farm. So that 11% has now grown bigger in support, because the reality is now setting in that you are not safe. You may own a blue chip company, you may be on the stock exchange. When expropriation kicks in, you are as vulnerable in Constantia as the guy in any other suburb. So perception is changing there, and we find it as well. We get registered mandates from people now in areas which is traditionally known as very rich areas. The mandates are coming in because the penny is busy dropping with a speed.
I suppose they had to be touched on their studio before they responded, hey?
Well, absolutely. You remember that. That was a good one.
Oh, sure. Yeah. But speaking of these kind of tangible effects, one of the ones that occurs to me quite strongly is something that came up in an interview I did with the city's portfolio manager for safety and security, JP Smith. And he mentioned that the gangs who are responsible for more than half of the murders in the province are largely protected by the ANC's power structure, which extends into the judiciary and the police service, and has inhibited attempts by the local metro police to solve crimes, and have dragged their heels or otherwise actively protected these violent predators who take such an enormous toll and make the Cape Flats the highest murder rate in South Africa, which puts it in the running for the worst violent crime statistics in the world. Have you had much success in conveying the capability of an independent Cape to mitigate these violent factors?
Robert, therein lies the challenge at the moment. At the moment, policing in the Western Cape falls under the national mandate of the national government. So you have no power. You have no power to go in and sort out any gang or crime-related issue. Because, and you know, since Marikane, policemen are actually scared to even carry a weapon, leave alone draw a weapon. We've had audio clips from policemen that are in a riot situation or a protest situation, and they are frustrated because they can't do anything, because the national mandate dictates to the Western Cape what may happen and may not happen.
Indeed.
Now, if you take a place which is predominantly a colored area, which is Lentegeur, in Lentegeur, the residents decided they also had enough. They stood up and they took on gangsterism head on. And I can tell you, we had a meeting with the other day with community leaders of Lentegeur, and they are very successful. They have no gangster activity. They have no drug abuse activity because they took action. Now, once you achieved independence and you become a direct democracy, you are giving that power back to the citizens of each area. The only reason why crime flourishes is because the criminal knows that the chance that, first of all, that he's going to get caught is very, very little. And if they actually do catch him, the chance that his docket will be lost somewhere in the system is actually very good. So his chance of actually coming up in court on charges is so negligible that it's worth taking the risk. So what you have to do is you have to reinstate the law and order to such an extent that his chances of getting or being found guilty in court moves very much closer to 100%.
Yes.
And there's nothing that curbs violence like the very good chance of being caught and being punished.
That's correct. I, as a matter of fact, that was part of what I did for my master's thesis, was the impact of consistent enforcement on the success of drug prohibition policies.
Okay.
So, yeah, I can attest the science supports your view. But yeah, no, I think policing, obviously, it's such a huge issue for the average South African, and yet it features almost not at all at our national level discussions, to the point at which, I mean, I know this is 15 years old, this quote, but it sticks with me. It's Charles Makula saying that, if you don't like it, you can leave. And that attitude remains amongst the South African political classes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a case of we're running the show, so if you don't like it, get out. Now, there's no bigger violation of your humanitarian rights to be told that. And that's why CapeXit is actually basing our entire drive based on international humanitarian rights, and that is being violated as fast as you can read it.
Mm-hmm. I think that this sort of state of contempt of the ordinary man has actually become quite a global feature. I notice it in the United Kingdom, where the entire political class, even the furthest right members of the currently governing Conservative Party, are further to the left on almost every single political issue than the average Briton. And the same counts for most of Europe over here, where permanent cartels of party coalitions persist for generations without addressing any issues to the satisfaction of the ordinary man. And I think I suppose a big question that most people put is that there will naturally be political issues in a new Western Cape, which will be of a national character. Now, seeing that proportional representation has produced in so many places around the world this kind of complacent dominant majority built of little factions, much as Europe, how would you approach that problem? And do you have a different mode of national representation that you would prefer to see in the legislative body?
Look, when you move to a sovereign independence and you move to a direct democracy, the political landscape changes. We have many parties that's got a national mandate, and that national mandate is normally based on what is good to the bigger part of South Africa. And inadvertently, that would alienate the Western Cape, because most of your voting power sits outside the Western Cape. It's based in Gauteng and areas like that. So you get policies are being formed on the basis of what is best for the guys up north. And we adopt that as a policy, and that is now being also mandated to be effective in the Western Cape. Now, the moment you take any political party out of the national context and you say we are now in the Western Cape, which has now become a new sovereign entity on its own. So now you have to revise and change your strategy from a political perspective. You now have to become relevant to the actual people that have now put their trust in you. Because if you look at the Swiss system, if anything is not to the liking of the taxpayers and the residents, if there's enough support, they can call a referendum on any issue. So you now have this very big word which is called accountability. At the moment, there is no accountability because, first of all, we sit with a one-party state, which is top-down governance. And secondly, you find that your political parties are hiding behind their political facade. There's no accountability. If you try and find the accountable guy, it's impossible.
These big machines. They become these big machines that don't have, they can't have an organic interaction with the people anymore. There's no consultation.
Absolutely. In fact, you find ward councillors who are actually appointed to a suburb and they don't even live in that suburb. So that is how I think how out of kilter the system became. So if you look at your system of governance, which will be absolutely direct with full accountability, the political landscape will definitely change and no longer a national mandate. In fact, if a party finds itself being represented throughout South Africa at the moment, they will have to remodel and remake the image to become relevant to the local or to the new country.
That's very sound. I think one of the issues that comes up a lot when we're talking about the Cape and power and politics and so on, the balance of the power lies in the mother city. How much outreach have you had in the smaller, more rural, the smaller towns and the rural areas? And what is the feedback? How would you characterize the difference in feedback?
Well, first of all, your approach has got to be different. There are a vast population within the urban areas which you can reach via Facebook or Twitter or your electronic media. Then you have more the people out in the country who's not so connected electronically. So we approach this thing on two marketing levels. The one level is marketing, for instance, through a media like Facebook. Now, Facebook is one of our marketing arms. Then on the more non-electronic basis, if I can put it that way, we do have activists out in the field who literally does the pavement pounding, moving into their communities physically with a form in their hand, explaining to them what independence is about, what it means for them as a rural community. And we find that part of it is a very essential part, is a very big part. And we started growing on that front very successfully since about 3-4 months ago.
No, that's very, very sound. I've noticed there are a lot of people who are based in around Drakenstein. People are sitting in Wellington. A lot of the leaders of this movement are sitting in Wellington and Paarl. I myself, grew up in Wellington as a little kid, and it's funny. It's fun. Yeah.
One of the hottest valleys in Cape Town.
Oh yeah, it's brutal. And you walk home when you walk home in the middle of the summer, and your feet are sticking to the tar. It's not a good. It's not a good time.
Absolutely not. Yeah.
But
so you grew up tough.
Oh, I wouldn't go that far. But no. It's just fascinating to me because we've had so many prominent figures come from the Drakenstein municipality. The Taalbeweging started there. You had the Breitenbach family come from Wellington.
Yes.
Adam Small. So many prominent figures, and being the epicenter of a lot of political change. Do you think there's something about Wellington and Paarl that sort of it was, my goodness, it was even the seat of the PAC until they were rounded up in 1960. Do you think there's something about that part of the country that sort of makes people a little bit antsy?
Well, the saying, it may be in the water, eh? Robert, what we find, you've now picked up on Paulwellington area towards the Boerland area. We find the same reaction out in the Garden Route. Tremendous support, a lot of active people. You may or may not know it. On Monday, we're starting the CapeXit 1.6 million awareness cycle tour, where we have one guy, Rian Brandt, who's going to cycle from Plettenberg Bay to Lambert's Bay over 22 days to raise awareness. We have already had tremendous reaction to this, massive support of people wanting to join him and welcome him along the road. So yes, our marketing is based on getting to all areas. We just happen to have very active, very passionate people out in Paulwellington area, and that is why they stand out. At the end of everything, their concerns are much the same as concerns from all over the Western Cape. But well, I can tell you this: it's good people out there. They probably representative of most of the people in the Western Cape. We are very tolerant people. The minorities in the Western Cape are very tolerant. If you look back, the interesting thing is that the Western Cape has always had its own form of constitution, even since the days of the Batavian Republic, which goes way back to Jan van Riebeeck and Simon van der Stel. In that constitution, there was a very high level of tolerance towards the Muslim people in terms of being allowed to build their own mosques and exercise their own faith. So we've always been used to having our own form of governance. And we have been tolerant to the point of allowing things to develop, see where it's going to go to. Can we actually contribute to the fabled, so-called but non-existent Rainbow Nation concept? And after 26, 27 years, the writing is on the wall. I think even a blind person can see it. Anybody that now says that there's any hope, I truly don't know where he's living.
Yeah.
We spoke to an
expert. The left have also been railing against rainbowism, as they call it, for a number of years now. It's I mean, even foreign visiting intellectuals make mention of it. I remember, what was her name? The famous Nigerian feminist Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. She came down to the Abantu Book Festival and made some noise about that. I seem to remember. What would you mainly sort of place as the primary cause here? Because there are a lot of conjectures. I mean, some people place it on sort of race and culture, and some people put it on the political program. Where would you sort of how would you diagnose the particular issue that South Africa faces?
We base the reason why we want independence on one thing only, and that's economic survival. We do not base it on anything else. If you look at, and I've been part of a panel discussion not too long ago, where the one guy very aptly described it as a train which is hurtling towards a fiscal cliff. And the front coaches of this train has already gone over the cliff. And the Western Cape is the last coach. And we better unhook this bloody thing, otherwise we've got a problem. Now, that is what it is. I mean, really, if we can talk figures for a minute, if you look at the Western Cape's contribution to the national GDP, the gross domestic product, in 2017, the Western Cape contributed 632 billion rand to the national GDP. What we get back, it's not the exception, this is the rule. What we get back is 8% of that coming back to the province to be used, which gives you about 50 billion. But of that 50 billion, 10 billion is only given as a grant with special conditions. So in fact, we only get back 40 billion. So if you look at the budget of the local government of the Western Cape for the last financial year was around about 77 billion rand. Now you make the sum. If we can keep 632 billion rand and not send it out of this province, we have a huge start economically. Then CapeXit is proposing this tax system called TEAL, which is Total Economic Activity Levy. A very simple system. It's based on any funds going into any bank account being taxed by 0.5%, and any funds going out of any bank account being taxed by 0.5%. So basically, you can say each South African rand that moves through a bank account will get taxed 1%. It sounds very low, but the economists looked at this model and they calculated that we will increase the current tax net 27-fold to such an extent that you can literally do away with your personal taxes, your company taxes, your tax and levies on fuels, your value-added taxes that you can do away with. Now, This
Hmm.
is not a foreign concept. There are a lot of countries operating on a zero tax base, and they're very successful. They're very wealthy. So to us, it's about economic survival. It's not about race, about politics, about anything. It's economic survival.
Hmm. Do you not worry that that will penalize people who have a lot of who do a lot of small, frequent transactions?
Look, at the moment, if we go to a shop, I pay 15% value added tax on
Hmm.
anything I purchase. So if I have 100 Rand going into my bank account and I receive it and I pay it out and I pay 1% tax, I'm paying 1 Rand on the 100 Rand. If I go to the shop, I'm actually giving up 15 Rand of the 100 Rand to buy my groceries.
Hmm.
So yeah, no, it won't. It will be a much fairer system.
I can see that, and I can also foresee this incentivizing saving, which I'm enormously in favor of. It will disincentivize a lot of profligate activity. One thing that I might foresee as a problem is that the banks might perceive this as a tax on banking, and might be inclined to try and sabotage your efforts. How would you plan to assuage their concerns, because they can be quite hefty and destructive players in the political arena?
Robert, I first want to turn the coin around and say, imagine when we have that system of taxation, imagine the investments that's going to flow into the Western Cape. You're actually effectively creating or making the entire Western Cape a tax-free haven, like free trade zones at the moment in the UAE and those places. Now investments will flow into the country, and we've already had indications from foreign countries and foreign businessmen that saying, we even had indications from people up in Pretoria that said, when the moment you become independent, I'm moving my head office down to Cape Town. Now, these are all blue chip companies. So what the banks will find is that they will have much stronger investment portfolios, which will make it a rather dumb move from their side to try and sabotage the system.
I foresee another problem. If you excuse me.
Absolutely.
A lot of foreign companies are now attached to the national security frameworks of the countries in which they originate. For example, all of the major tech companies are part of the Central Intelligence Agency's enduring security framework, and they are employed to propagate ideology favorable to American imperialism. They're used to destabilize regimes that are unfavorable to American economic interests or political interests. And Alan Winde of the Democratic Alliance has brokered a deal which allows them to set up offices in Cape Town, following which he adopted their preferred strategy for lockdown. How would you plan to deal with, how do you plan to address the issue of foreign political infiltration?
Robert, the moment you become an independent foreign entity, you make your own decisions. Now, there's a couple of factors that come into play. The first one is, let's look at state assets in terms of pensions and assets itself, be it airports or harbors, ports, whatever. That will obviously all migrate to the ownership of the new country. Now, you are not obligated as a new sovereign entity to honor any agreement that's been made by anybody in South Africa or any current government in the Western Cape. You are not obliged to honor anything. You will actually reevaluate and review a lot of things. There are various deals being made at the moment with the Chinese. There are various controversies and deals being made around about Kubik nuclear station, power station. We are not obliged as an independent country to honor any of these. So what you have to do is you have to build out a very strong constitutional framework. The Western Cape obviously will have its own constitution, the new constitution, which in fact people are working on at the moment. And that constitution will have the safeguards in it that actually, that you do not commit yourself to anything that's been brokered, any deal has been brokered. If it's a good deal, absolutely. If there's any good technology deal on the table, we will reevaluate it. And the new, if I say we, the new government of the day, will reevaluate it and say, yes, we're happy to carry on with that deal. If there's a deal that's detrimental to the new country, it will be taken off the table.
Very sound response. How much contact have you had with the Democratic Alliance, and what has their reaction been, if any, when dealing with you?
The Democratic Alliance is facing a very uncomfortable reality, and that reality is independence. The poll that was done returned a percentage of 63% of the current Democratic supporters and voters that are in favor of independence. So they find themselves torn between two, I think, uncomfortable choices. The one choice is if you say, yes, I support independence, and you alienate the rest of the people in South Africa, or you say, I don't support independence, and you alienate your supporters in the Western Cape. Alan Winde actually was very bold in already declaring publicly that he will not call a referendum, in spite of the fact that he's within his constitutional powers, according to the Western Cape Constitution, to do so. So do the DA know about us? Yes, they do. I've had the opportunity to share some of our literature with one of the national leaders. I was promised a discussion around it, and that unfortunately never happened. They are very aware of it. They're trying to ignore it as much as they can. They want to delegate the aspect of independence to being irrelevant, but they know as well as we do that, first of all, it's not going to go away. And second of all, CapeXit at the moment has got the second biggest support base in the Western Cape, just after the DA. So the one problem they have is their support base is stagnant. It's not growing. If anything, it's going down. And CapeXit's support base is growing with about 10 to 12,000 mandates a week. So yes, they may ignore us at this point in time. They will not be able to do so successfully forever.
I think that's very much true. And I think I've also noticed, to some extent, there have been maneuvers made by the Democratic Alliance, which seem very favorable to, if not independence, at least local autonomy. Making Stellenbosch electricity independent is their current project, although we've seen maneuvers with desalination plants and all sorts of other maneuvers. How much confidence does this give you in their intentions at the moment? Because it sounds to me as if their current position is trying to keep a calm public face while pedaling very frantically under the water.
How much confidence do I have? The answer is nothing. It's very simple. Let's look at the whole lockdown and COVID situation, where the Western Cape government decided that people may smoke. You may buy cigarettes. The national government then said, no, we don't like that. You're not allowed to sell cigarettes. So it doesn't matter what the local government decides. The national government sits up there and they decide no. So it's very well during the last election to put posters up on the polls saying that vote for us. We want a provincial police force or provincial railway. Yes, that's a political promise. You've got to face the reality that one side is a political promise. The other side, is it actually achievable? And it's not. This current national government will allow you certain things, but they will not allow you everything. So have I got any hope of decentralization being allowed at the current status quo? Answer is no.
I suppose just an interesting speculation while we've been talking. You mentioned that you have quite a large support base. Certainly, 600 approaching 700,000 members is nothing to scoff at. Have you and other members of the Cape independence movement ever considered sort of leveraging that into a party position as a means of coercing, as a negotiating tactic with the Democratic Alliance?
Not in a political party perspective, no. We will never do that. The reason why we're successful and why we're gaining such support is because we're playing outside the political field. Like I said earlier on, people are tired of political promises. They hear that every 4 years. And the day after the election, the promises disappear like mist in front of the sun. So no, CapeXit will never leverage the support base in a political atmosphere, a political environment. We will leverage it purely as being the wish of the will of the people. I think anybody that wants to get to a point, any organization that gets to a point and decides to leverage his support base into a political atmosphere will find himself as becoming as irrelevant as most of the political parties. They're there, but they can't really do anything to challenge the status quo. At this point in time, CapeXit is building support that we are becoming a real challenge to the status quo.
Very good. One other angle. Now, probably the biggest and most prominent anti-Pretoria movement, if I can call it that, in the country at the moment is Solidariteit. And they've put a lot, Flipbase and company have put a lot of effort into building a large number of parallel institutions and support networks for people. How does this model strike you? And do you think that they have that they are how should I put it? How friendly are the relations, would you say, between the Cape Independence crowd and the sort of Afrikaans national localism, for lack of a better word?
Yeah. Robert, personally, I have met Flipbase. I know Solidarity. I know AfriForum very well, which is one of their arms. I think the work they are doing is actually great to create these parallel institutions. However, that to me plays more to the concept of self-determination. Now, let's look at the two concepts, the one being self-determination, the one being sovereign independence. If you look at the areas outside the Western Cape, i.e. Gauteng and those areas, you'll find yourself that the minorities, as we know them being white, colored, Cohesion, Muslim, the minorities up north are really minorities. You sit within a very vast majority, and you can only try and become the master of your own affairs by creating parallel institutions or being allowed to, in your town, do your own municipal services and maintain your own roads. So those are measures of self-determination, but it is within a small area, within the bigger entity still called South Africa. So you don't really have any external powers with self-determination. So it's good to develop a parallel university. However, expropriation without compensation may just close your doors because you're still subject to the laws of South Africa. Whereas sovereign independence, you cut the ties, you close your border, and you become a new country, which is vastly different. And that concept can only play out in the Western Cape, where the minorities in South Africa are still the majority in the Western Cape. So kudos to them, very well done. And as we don't talk to one another every day or every week or once a month, because we are on different paths.
Yes.
We see our economic survival different from what the guys up north sees it.
Very sound. Well, I'm out of questions. If there's anything else that you'd like to address before we go, anything you'd like to give a bit of oxygen to, anything to add?
Absolutely, thank you. I think the point I want to make is, again, we cannot make this happen without the support of the people because it's based on the will of the people. We've got a document called The Road to Independence, and that document will tell you two things in the very first couple of pages. It will tell you that the directors of CapeXit, we're not politicians, we're not learned scholars, we're not professors, we're not doctors, we're very ordinary people that decided that we have to do something. We've got the passion to drive it. We've got the passion to succeed with it. And the other thing, it tells you that all of this is subject to the will of the people. So we need the people to understand that they have the right to secede. That right is vested in our constitution, in section 235, although section 235 has never had a law underpinning that section, it does allow you to create the reality of independence on the ground, and that is what CapeXit is doing. So if any of the people subscribing to your channel wants to have a look at what CapeXit is about, please, they must visit our website, which is simply all the W's, www.capeexit.org, and have a read what it's about, and share this message to anybody in the world. We need internal support being from within the Western Cape. We need external support being from outside the Western Cape, and that will all go towards our international support base. So they're very welcome. Visit the website, pop us an email. The email address is on the website, and I would love to get your recording on your platform, your channel. When it's ready, I'll share it to our channels. And all I can say in parting is thank you for the time. I really appreciate it, and I really enjoyed the chat, and let's do it again.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Des. Good night.